Hello everybody, this is David. Welcome back to my channel. Well, it's been a couple of weeks since I did my last video. I have been working on a video for you, but it's weather dependent and I've only filmed half of it so far. So I'm waiting for some good weather so I can finish that video. But I've had some thoughts buzzing around in my mind since the video when we went to southeast London. I remember that we went through the Elephant and Castle, which was the home of the Metropolitan Tabernacle, which was the church of Charles Hadden Spurgeon, who was the most famous minister of the gospel in 19th century Britain. And since then I've had a few thoughts buzzing around in my mind. Because since that video I've discovered that Karl Marx, who is infamous, I would say, for the founder of Marxism and socialism and communism, he and Charles Hadden Spurgeon lived in London in exactly the same time. And what I wanted to do in this video is look at the differences between those two men, and I want to look at the social conditions that they lived in, what was actually happening in the country, in the world at the time, and I want to look at the differences in those two men's lives and the differences in their messages. They both had a message that they were both on fire, if I can put it like that. They were on fire about, they were both committed to, they were both passionate about. So this video is going to be a series of thoughts which these thoughts have been rolling around, been buzzing around in my mind since that video where we went past the Metropolitan Tabernacle. So I hope you enjoy this. It's been a couple of weeks in the making, so here we are. Let's go for it. So let's have a look at who is Charles Hadden Spurgeon. Who was he? You may not be familiar with him, so I just wanted to give an overview of who he was. Charles Hadden Spurgeon was known as the Prince of Preachers. He was a Baptist minister, and he was known to give a powerful gospel witness in his time. But his influence endures today, so much so that he's been regarded as one of evangelical Christianity's immortals. But what makes Spurgeon immortal? Whether you're new to him, as probably many of you are, or a familiar friend, here are a few things that you should know about him. Firstly, he was born on June the 19th, 1834 in Kelvedon, Essex, to John and Eliza Spurgeon. He was the firstborn of 17 children. 17 children, although unfortunately only 8 of those children survived into adolescence. He loved his books here, and he became fascinated with John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress. However, he did not become a Christian until January the 6th, 1850. And he was in the middle of a blizzard when he ran into a church. He sought shelter in a church, the first church he could find, which was the primitive Methodist chapel on Artillery Street in Colchester in England. There Charles heard a sermon delivered by a man who was, in his words, really stupid and could not even pronounce his words rightly. Yet, by God's grace, Charles looked to Christ and was saved. So after that, he moved to Cambridge and he joined St Andrew Street Baptist Church and began his ministry as an itinerant preacher. As a young man, this was. In October of 1851, Charles was called to preach in his first church, Waterbeach Chapel, and soon thereafter accepted the pastorate of New Park Street Chapel in Southwark, London, in April of 1854. Now Southwark was a very poor area then, in that time then. In 1861, the Metropolitan Tabernacle opened and his ministry exploded, resulting in the founding of 66 parachurch ministries. That's a lot of ministry to do. His remarkable ministry in London would last 38 years before his death on the 31st of January 1892. Now, Charles lived during the Victorian age, where progress was the prized virtue of the day. Now, we're going to be looking at what this progress was in a few other thoughts, in my few other thoughts as we go through the video. Born in the country, when the 19-year-old moved to London in 1854, he was entering the largest and most powerful city in the world. That's London. However, in London he found himself on the south side of the river in Southwark Borough. According to Helen Douglas Irving's work, The History of London, Southwark enjoyed the infamous distinction of a preeminently evil reputation and a meanness which proceeds from extreme poverty and decay. So it wasn't a very nice place. To complicate matters, when Charles arrived at New Park Street Chapel, the dwindling congregation there could not pay him a regular salary. Rather, he was paid by the fluctuating and meagre seat rent. When the congregation and the giving revived after 3 months of his ministry, he declared, "I will pay for the cleaning and lighting myself." And from that day on he covered all the incidental expenses of New Park Street Chapel and the Metropolitan Tabernacle to his death. Amazing, don't you think? But Charles Spurgeon did more than cover the incidentals. By the age of 27, the young pastor had donated approximately £1 million of the required £3 million, thereabouts, towards the construction of the Metropolitan Tabernacle. How did he do this? He earned his money from speaking fees and from the sale of his wildly popular sermons and books. He didn't even take a salary from his new megachurch. Charles Spurgeon was truly a unique instrument of the Lord Jesus Christ. One of the most remarkable aspects of his life and legacy is that he holistically exemplified Christian virtue in his ministry. With respect to evangelistic zeal, Charles's passion for evangelism is seen in every Christ-centered facet of his life, his ministry, and his sermons. During his lifetime, he preached the gospel to over 1 million people and personally baptized 15,000 new believers converted under his ministry. Furthermore, his sermons were translated into nearly 40 languages, including Arabic, Armenian, Bengali, Bulgarian, Castilian, Chinese, Congolese, Czech, Dutch, Estonian, French, Gaelic, German, Hindi, Russian, Serbian, Syriac, Tamil, Telugu, Urdu, and I don't know why I'm laughing, Welsh. Called a 9 days wonder, which was actually an insult, a terrible slur by the Sheffield and Rotherham Independent, a newspaper, this boy preacher of the Fens took the world by storm when he arrived in London in 1854. The young preacher was a force to be reckoned with and provoked polarised reactions. The Ipswich Express said that his sermons were redolent of bad taste and vulgar and theatrical. On the other hand, Elimas L. Magoon, his first biographer, said that when Charles arrived in London, a burning and shining light has suddenly burst upon the moral world. His voice was full, sweet, and musical, and the massive crowds that Spurgeon drew by open-air preaching led Magoon to title his biography of Spurgeon, The Modern Whitefield. But how was Charles viewed by the people, the least of these to whom he ministered to in his blighted community? In 1855, one anonymous writer, Vox Populi, the voice of the people, wrote that Mr. Spurgeon institutes a new era, or more correctively revives the good old styles of Bunyan, Wesley and Whitefield, men whose burning eloquence carried conviction to the hearts of their hearers, men who cared naught for the applause of their fellow mortals, but did all for God's glory. Indeed, Charles gave fresh voice to the stream of rich theology which flowed through Calvin, Owen, Bunyan, Edwards, Wesley and Whitefield. He knew that Christ had not commanded him to feed my giraffes, but rather to feed my sheep. Thus in preaching he insisted that, I'm getting emotional, I don't know why, we must not put the fodder on a high rack by our fine language, but use great plainness of speech. And Charles did speak plainly and often upon his favourite theme, Jesus Christ and him crucified. Indeed, it is for this richly theological, exceptionally vivid and dogmatically Christocentric preaching for which Charles Spurgeon is known. Now there's a lot more that I could say about him, but I think we'll stop it there. So let's now look at Karl Marx. His full name, Karl Heinrich Marx, born on the 5th of May 1818 in Trier, Prussia, which was part of the German Confederation at the time. He was, I'm getting this from Wikipedia, was a German philosopher, economist, historian, sociologist, political theorist, journalist and socialist revolutionary. Born in Trier, Germany, Marx studied law and philosophy at university. He married Jenny von Westphalen in 1843. Due to his political publications, Marx became stateless, in other words he was kicked out, and lived in exile with his wife and children in London, which we've already talked about, where he continued to develop his thought in collaboration with German thinker Friedrich Engels, and published his writings researching in the reading room of the British Museum. His best-known titles are the 1848 pamphlet The Communist Manifesto and the 3-volume Das Kapital, published between 1867 and 1883, and we'll look at a little bit about some of the things he says as well. Marx's political and philosophical thought had enormous influence on subsequent intellectual, economic and political history. I would say that's an understatement. His name has been used as an adjective, a noun and a school of social theory. Marx's critical theories about society, economics and politics, collectively understood as Marxism, hold that human societies develop through class conflict, and in the capitalist mode of production, this manifests itself in the conflict between the ruling classes, known as the bourgeois, that control the means of production, and the working classes, known as the proletariat, that enable these means by selling their labour power in return for wages. Employing a critical approach known as historical materialism, Marx predicted that capitalism produced internal tensions like previous socio-economic systems, and that those would lead to its self-destruction and replacement by a new system known as the socialist mode of production. For Marx, class antagonisms under capitalism, owing in part to its instability and crisis-prone nature, would eventuate the working class's development of class consciousness, leading to their conquest of political power and eventually the establishment of a classless communist society constituted by a free association of producers. Marx actively pressed for its implementation, arguing that the working class should carry out organised proletarian revolutionary action to topple capitalism and bring about socio-economic emancipation. In other words, revolution, violent revolution. Marx has been described as one of the most influential figures in human history, and his work has been lauded and criticised. His work in economics laid the basis for much of the current understanding of labour and its relation to capital and subsequent economic thought. Many intellectuals, labour unions, artists and political parties worldwide have been influenced by Marx's work, with many modifying or adapting his ideas. Marx is typically cited as one of the principal architects of modern social science. So, Wikipedia says a lot about him. Let's have a look now at a few of the things that he said. So, one of the things he says in the Communist Manifesto was that communism abolishes eternal truths. And he says it abolishes all religion and all morality, instead constituting them on a new basis. And in another part of that book he says, abolish the family, the bourgeois family. Now the term bourgeois was a derogatory tone, and we'll have a look at what bourgeois means in detail shortly. The bourgeois family will vanish as a matter of course when its complement vanishes, and both will vanish with the vanishing of capital. The bourgeois claptrap about the family and education, about the hallowed correlation of parent and child, becomes all the more disgusting the more by the action of modern industry. All family ties among the proletarians are torn asunder, and their children transformed into simple articles of commerce and instruments of labour. So this is the sort of thing that he said. Now, if you look at his writings, we'll see he wasn't actually a very nice man. He said a lot of bad things about society, about the family, about all kinds of things. Now, why did he say that? Where was he coming from? Well, I thought it would be good to look at a few of the things that were happening in Europe and England in the 1850s, and then we'll see where he was coming from and also where Charles Spurgeon was coming from. So let's do that now. So what I want to do now is look at 19th century England social hierarchy. How was the nation set up? How was it run? How was it built? How did it run? And we'll have a look at how Europe was set up as well. And we'll see certain similarities, and we'll see why Karl Marx was thrown out of Europe. So, social hierarchy is a classification of society of a nation that segregates the resident of a country into certain groups based on various factors, out of which the wealth and occupation play a significant role in this segregation. So we'll see that in all societies there's a huge number of people in the society, but not all of those people have the same job. They don't all do the same thing for a living. They don't have the same status in the society. So there are mixtures of factors depending upon which the basic social structure of a society is divided into different classes in diverse ways. Now these factors include division on the basis of power, education, economic status, prestige, things like that. And this was the same with 19th century England. The social hierarchy of 19th century England was divided into several classes, and those classes were further subdivided. Accordingly, the 19th century social hierarchy, let me see if I can make it simple for you. Firstly, we had the ruling classes. We had the aristocrats, who included the royal family, the spiritual lords, the temporal lords, and the great officers of the state, who were the baronets, the knights, and the country gentlemen. Then we have the middle class. We have the upper middle class, who are the factory owners, the large-scale businessmen, the bankers, the doctors, the lawyers, the engineers, and the clergymen. Then we have the lower middle class, the small-scale businessman, the shopkeeper, the merchants, and the civil servants. Then we have the lower classes. We have the working class. We have the labourers, the factory workers, seamstresses, miners, sweepers, etc. And then we have the poor, who were generally at the very, very bottom of the ladder. So let's look at what life was like in the 1800s in England. Now, one of the key aspects of the 1800s in England in the 1800s was the large-scale shifting of the population from the country to the cities and the town. And also during this time, the Industrial Revolution had led to the increase of factories and machine-made goods. So in 1801, only about 20% of the population lived in towns. But by 1851, 50% of the population lived in towns. So what happened? What was going on? The large and sudden influx of people into the towns led to appalling housing conditions. 2 up, 2 down tenements. It was just dreadful. Many houses were built literally back to back in areas that had only been villages earlier on. There was no drainage in the streets, and toilets were shared by several houses. Houses consisted of 1 or 2 rooms which were overcrowded and without adequate heating or ventilation. The 1800s, saw numerous outbreaks of cholera, and in 1840 town councils brought in measures to regulate back-to-back buildings, and cellar houses were banned. So, due to the Industrial Revolution, by the end of the century, most goods were made by machines in factories. Now, this created a great demand for child and female labour force to work up to 12 hours a day or even longer hours. A new law passed in 1819 made it illegal for children below 9 years of age to work in the cotton mills, and children aged 9 to 13 years could not be made to work more than 12 hours in a day, which indicates that they were working 12 hours in a day, and it indicates that children under 9 were working in the cotton mills, very dangerous industries. A law created a few years later stipulated that no one below 18 years old could be made to work between 8:30 and 5:30. Why was that? They're supposed to be in school. The 1800s saw the first passenger railway between Stockton and Darlington opened in 1825, as well as a line between Manchester and Liverpool in 1830. By 1842, Britain had more than 5,000 miles of railway. So, what was going on? Unbelievable poverty and, how can I put it, just awful living conditions. There was so much going on that there was incredible pollution. There was no health and safety laws. There was just no regulation really at all. Child labour was prevalent. Women were forced to work. There's accounts of women in the mines, women digging tunnels, All kinds of things were going on. It was a dreadful time, really, for the ordinary person. And the poor, those that were just too poor to do anything, were forced to work in what was called the workhouse, which was a place where it was like modern day slavery. They were just, the society, the setup, and there was, the way the system was set up was the super rich, the middle classes, and the working classes. So into this time, into this era, two great men came: Charles Spurgeon, who had one message, and Karl Marx, who had another message. Now, of course, the 1850s were the time of the age of exploration. You read amazing stories of how the British Navy went all over the world. They did, for example, the Northern Passage through the Arctic Circle, through Canada, to try and find a trade route that cut out going round either Africa or South America. And of course, the Suez Canal was built in the 1800s as well. It was the age of great discovery. There was voyages to the Antarctic, where places where people had never ever been before. There was great discoveries, medicine. There was industrial medicines, but people suffered. It was just an incredible time, really. For the ordinary person, they really suffered, as they do today. So there was two messages going on. There was Karl Marx's message, overthrow the system, and there was Charles Spurgeon's message, which was overthrow the human heart and make it new. Which one won? Let's have a look now at what was going on in Europe and why Karl Marx was thrown out of so many countries. So the 1800s in Europe was a century of drastic change. There had been many advancements before the 1800s even happened, where the Industrial Revolution had begun in the 1700s. But the advancements had propelled the Industrial Revolution into a global movement, with entire wars fought with newly developed technologies, creating, and I'm getting this again from Wikipedia, creating an impetus to imperialist campaigns across Africa and Asia, as well as the counter movement on Latin America. So there was a lot of wars, there was an amazing amount of politics going on, but the political landscape was dominated by the Napoleonic Wars, a series of conflicts declared against Napoleon's First French Empire and changing sets of European allies by opposing coalitions that ran from 1803 to 1815, as a continuation of the war sparked by the French Revolution of 1789. They revolutionised European armies and played out on an unprecedented scale, mainly due to the application of modern mass conscription. French power rose quickly, conquering most of Europe by the end of the decade. And in the 9th of November 1799, Napoleon overthrew the French government, replacing it with the consulate, in which he was the first consul. Of course, all kinds of things were going on. Napoleon planned to invade Britain, but a renewed British alliance with Russia and Austria forced him to turn his attention towards the continent, while at the same time failure to lure the superior British fleet away from the English Channel ended in a decisive French defeat at the Battle of Trafalgar. Of course, that's where we lost Lord Nelson. he was fatally wounded. So he was a right so-and-so. He defeated a numerically superior Austro-Russian army at Austerlitz, forcing Austria's withdrawal. There was a Treaty of Pressburg dissolving the Holy Roman Empire. The War of the Fifth Coalition fought in the year 1809, pitted the Austrian Empire against the United Kingdom, and the United Kingdom against the French Empire and Bavaria. There were major engagements between France and Austria. All kinds of things were going on. So there was lots of other wars and stuff going on. There was the White Lotus Rebellion, which was an uprising against the Qing dynasty in China. There was the beginning of the Russo-Turkish War between Russia and the Ottoman Empire, the First Barbary War between the United States and the Barbary states of North Africa, Muslim states, end of the Qazi War, the Second Anglo-Maratha War, fought between the Maratha Peshwa on one side and minor chieftains of the Maratha Confederacy, Sindhia, Bonsi and Hokla. Amazing. The Fulani War, which is still going on today in Nigeria and Cameroon. The First Serbian Uprising. Haiti gained independence from France. The Irish Republican Robert Emmet leads a rebellion in Dublin, in Ireland. Unfortunately, he was executed. There was a marked increase in the Atlantic slave trade to the United States up to 1808. Of course, the abolitionist movement started. Britain enacted the Slave Trade Act of 1807, and I think it was 1835, Britain abolished slavery in the empire. There was all kinds of things going on. Colonies in Canada, Russian America, New Spain, South America. There was also lots of things going on in science and technology. Electricity was being experimented with. There was great advances in astronomy. Asteroids were discovered. Ceres, Pallas, Juno and Vesta are all planets were discovered. There was the invention of the Jacquard loom. Ultraviolet radiation was discovered by John Wilhelm Ritter. The flag semaphore was gradually adopted by various navies of the world. Morphine was isolated from opium for the first time in 1804. 1809, Nicholas Appert develops a method to preserve food by means of the tin can, and John Dalton publishes atomic theory in 1803. So I think we'll leave it there for now. So that was the Europe and the Britain that Marx and Spurgeon inhabited in the 1800s. A time of amazing change, incredible technology, amazing social change, just like today. And I want to have a look at some of the things that are going on today shortly in a few thoughts. But let me just say this, that there's no actual indication that Marx and Spurgeon ever met, although I'm absolutely sure that they were certainly aware of each other and the irreconcilable nature of the messages each one proclaimed. One was preaching violent revolution, overthrow the system, and the other one was preaching the love of God, the overthrow of the human heart, the overthrow of sin in the human heart, that would lead to the regeneration and the reordering of society when men and women trusted in Christ and let God do the reordering of the society. So Marx's message of secular salvation gained prominence after the publication of the first volume of Das Kapital in 1867. And I'm sure after that, Spurgeon began to take note of Marx's philosophy, if not the man himself. So it would be wrong to say, as many preachers do, that addressing matters of politics falls outside the job of the minister of the gospel. Of no other sphere of life do they say it. And Spurgeon certainly didn't agree with that idea. Christianity isn't merely an accessory to a man's life, it should define it. Thus a man's politics are simply the outward manifestation of the convictions of his heart. Socialism, Spurgeon knew, was much more than an economic or political question. It is a spiritual question, if only because it denies the very existence of the spiritual. It is atheism masquerading as political philosophy. It's an idea, it's an attempt to fix the world in a godless way, an attempt to fix the world without God, without Christ. And Spurgeon had in fact noted the dangers of socialism really early in his ministry. In 1855 he warned of communists who wanted nothing less than the real disruption of all society as at present established. He asked the gathered, would you desire reigns of terror here as they had in France? Now if you look into what happened in the French Revolution, that was just awful. It was just terrible. An awful thing that happened there. Do you wish to see all society shattered and men wandering like monster icebergs on the sea, dashing against each other and being at last utterly destroyed, he said. But it is in the post-1871 period that he speaks more frequently and with greater urgency on the subject of socialism. In a sermon on Psalm 118 in June 1878, Spurgeon made a tentative prediction to his congregation. German rationalism, which has ripened into socialism, may yet pollute the mass of mankind and lead them to overturn the foundations of society. Then advanced principles, in quotation marks, will hold carnival and free thought. In other words, atheism will riot with the vice and blood which were years ago the insignia of the age of reason. I will not say that it will be so, but I should not wonder if it came to pass, for deadly principles are abroad, and certain ministers are spreading them. Now, this was before the Russian Revolution of 1917, which was started by Vladimir Lenin, where we get the word Leninism from. Stalin came from that. Even Hitler, Mao, Mao Zedong, Kim Jong-un. So many millions of people have died through communism and socialism. It's an anti-God philosophy. It's a hatred of, I would say, hatred of man, normal society, normal idea, hatred of the family, the idea of working for what you own. Anyway, let's not go there. We can get there somewhere another day. In a sermon on Isaiah 66 in April 1889, Spurgeon, recognising that many had confused the gospel of Jesus Christ with the cheap secular knockoff proclaimed by Marx, said from his pulpit, "For many a year, by the grand old truths of the gospel, sinners were converted and saints were edified, and the world was made to know that there is a God in Israel. But these are too antiquated for the present cultured race of superior beings. They are going to regenerate the world by democratic socialism and set up a kingdom for Christ without the new birth or the pardon of sin. Truly the Lord has not taken away the 7,000 that have not bowed the knee to Baal. So I want to suggest that in each era, in each period of history, in each generation, there are two choices. The choice is, do we do life God's way, or do we do life man's way? And there are consequences to those choices. In the next segment, I want to share a few thoughts on the choices before us, modern history, say from 1960, say the last 100 years, 1960, 1970, something like that. Sorry, no, 70 years, the last 70 years. I would say there's two choices between for us, for the world. And I want to look at those now. So I would say that we're facing very similar issues today in our own time, in our own century, as happened in the 1850s. We are looking at tremendous social, political change in our world. We're looking at the rise of, I suppose, left-wing politics, leftism. You only have to look at what happened in the United States to see that. The election there, should I say. We've got tremendous technology, and we've also got the cancel culture, which is quite incredible, really. We've got censorship from big tech over any dissenting voice. We've got the rise of socialism, Pan-Africanism, which is effectively communism in African clothes. We've got the rise of jihadism in Africa, down in the south of Africa, Mozambique, also in Nigeria, the Fulani war that we mentioned earlier on, still raging. We live in incredible times, amazing technology, yet people still suffer. The ordinary man still suffers in most countries, and the ruling classes couldn't care less. What are we going to do about it? Well, I'm going to suggest that there are two choices again set before us. We are probably down through history. We've had two choices set before us. We go man's way with all its consequences, or we go God's way with his consequences. Yes, we may suffer in this life through being born again, through being a Christian, through doing things God's way, but our reward is far greater than any reward we could ever have in this life. That's to be with Jesus eventually, and one day he will call an end to this world with all its sin and all its problems and all its issues, and he will institute a rod of iron rule. He will institute a reign of righteousness, and aren't we looking forward to that day? So this video has been a collection of thoughts started by a drive-by through southeast London a few weeks ago, past the Metropolitan Tabernacle, the Church of Charles Hadden Spurgeon, and my finding out that Karl Marx lived in London at the same time. And so I hope I haven't rambled. I hope I've been coherent in my thoughts. You may not agree with everything I've said. That's fine. Feel free to disagree with me in the comments. But let me just say, which way, whose method are you going to go with? Are you going to go with Karl's method or Charles' method? Whichever method you choose, there's going to be consequences. So want to thank you very much for joining me in this video, and I'll see you on the next video. Thank you very much. Bye bye.